Okay, so I just finished producing that first clip and realized that it took me about 19 minutes to read through that first passage. So that's not horrible. I'd like to go a little bit faster than that. Remember, though, that I'm doing a lot of talking and thinking aloud during this, and so that's consuming quite a bit of time. We're going to go ahead and attack this second writing by Bertrand Russell, and hopefully it's a little bit more enjoyable, but I wouldn't count on it. So here we go. The happy life is to an extraordinary extent the same as the good life. So I'm going to underline, I'm moving around the thing here. I'm going to underline this whole first sentence here because that good life component is really critical for me. He says, professional moralists have made too much of self-denial. Tell you what, I'm going to underline professional moralists and put a question mark there because I just don't know what that is. Have made too much of self-denial, and in so doing have put the emphasis in the wrong place. This is one of those scenarios where I could spend a little bit of time thinking about this. Professional moralists have made too much of self-denial, and in doing so have put the emphasis in the wrong place. It's kind of a confusing sentence, but I'm going to go ahead and move on and hope that he becomes a little more clear, right? So conscious self-denial leaves a man self-absorbed, okay, and vividly aware of what he has sacrificed. So it leaves him self-absorbed and aware of what he has sacrificed. I'm going to underline those two things. So self-denial, refusing to give yourself something, leaves you self-absorbed and aware of what you've given up. In consequence, it fails often of its immediate object and almost always of its ultimate purpose. So it fails of its purpose. That's all I need to take from that sentence. What is needed is not self-denial, but that kind of direction of interest outward, which will lead spontaneously and naturally to the same acts that a person absorbed in the pursuit of his own virtue could only perform by means of conscious self-denial. I have written in this book as a hedonist. They should have given you a definition for that word, but they didn't. That is to say, as one who regards happiness as the good, but the acts to be recommended from the point of view of the hedonist are on the whole the same as those to be recommended by the sane moralist. Wow. Okay. So, a hedonist. That is to say, as one who regards happiness as the good. So that's what a hedonist is. Somebody who regards happiness as good. But the acts to be recommended from the point of view of the hedonist, so the actions that he's going to recommend that you take from the perspective of somebody who thinks happiness is good, are about the same as somebody who is a moralist would say as well. So he's equating the hedonist and the moralist. These two things are, again, opposites. So both of these authors are kind of doing the compare and contrast for us, and a little, kind of. Let's move on. The moralist, however, is too apt, though this is not, of course, universally true, to stress the act rather than the state of mind. Let me explain something to you. What you're reading right here is philosophical jargon, and it's really difficult to understand when philosophers write because they just talk so far above a topic that it's really difficult to understand. The moralist, however, is too apt, though this is not, of course, universally true. Tell you what, this sentence, get rid of it. We're not even going to waste our time on this. Because basically what he's saying is that what he just said is not always true. Right? He says this is not universally true, but that sentence is just making me angry, so I just crossed it out. The brilliant part is, when they grade this essay, they're not even going to know if I read that sentence or not, because I'm not going to use it in my essay. And unless I'm just gravely mistaken, and that's like the whole point of this paper, then I don't think we need it. So the effects of an act upon the agent will be widely different according to his state of mind at the moment. So the effects of an act will be different according to the state of mind at the moment. If you see a child drowning and save it as a result of a direct impulse to bring help, you will emerge none the worse morally. If, on the other hand, you say to yourself, it is part of the virtue to succor, I think it's succor, I don't know, the helpless, and I wish to be a virtuous man, therefore I must save this child, you will be an even worse man afterwards than you were before. What applies in this extreme case applies in many other instances that are less obvious. Okay, so that's my video processing. Let's go ahead. You will be an even worse man afterwards than you were before. So basically what he's saying is, if you go to save a child of your own accord, so let's say you jump into the water, then you're going to be a worse person when you come out on the other side because now your ego is going to be bigger, I think. So he says it would be better to run and get help. You would be no worse morally, right? You would be no worse. Where does he say that? You will emerge. I hate when that happens. It says here, you will emerge none the worse morally, right? So, again, Bertrand Russell is basically saying YOLO. Interestingly enough. In my mind, that's what he's saying. He's saying you may as well live life like a hedonist as opposed to a moralist because you're going to have the same benefits from life regardless. So that's actually pretty interesting because both authors, their first paragraph is saying, forget the norm, right? We're going to live our way. I now have a point of compare and contrast, which is what I'm looking for. Pretty cool. So there's another difference, somewhat more subtle, between the attitude towards life that I have been recommending and that which is recommended by the traditional moralist. This is becoming an important concept. The traditional moralist, for example, will say that love should be unselfish. Right? This is not what he believes. This is what the traditional moralist believes. In a certain sense, he is right, so he's agreeing with him here. That is to say, it should not be selfish beyond a point. So he's actually qualifying that idea. He says they're right, but here we go. It should be undoubtedly of such a nature that one's own happiness is bound up in its success. One's own happiness is bound up in its success. If a man were to invite a lady to marry him on the ground that he ardently desired her happiness, and at the same time considered that she would afford him ideal opportunities of self-abnegation, which means self-denial, I think it may be doubted whether she would be altogether pleased. Undoubtedly, we should desire the happiness of those whom we love, but not as an alternative to our own. In fact, the whole antithesis between self and the rest of the world, which is implied in the doctrine of self-denial, disappears as soon as we have any genuine interest in persons or things outside ourselves. Interesting. Let me read this again. Undoubtedly, we should desire the happiness of those whom we love, but not as an alternative to our own. In fact, the whole antithesis between self and the rest of the world, right? And when we have these phrases where you have a comma here and a comma here, let's skip over those, especially when it's in such dense writing. We're just going to skip that appositive because we know that it's just extra information if it's got commas on both sides of it, right? Disappears as soon as we have any genuine interest in persons or things outside of ourselves. So the idea that we are different from the rest of the world kind of disappears when we have interests in things outside of ourselves. Through such interests, a man comes to feel himself part of the stream of life, not a hard, separate entity like a billiard ball, which can have no relation with other such entities except that of collision. So he's saying that people like to think of themselves as individuals who just kind of collide with one another until you need something from other people. Then you want to be one, right? I think that's kind of interesting. All unhappiness depends upon some kind of disintegration or lack of integration. There is disintegration within the self through lack of coordination between the conscious and unconscious mind. There's a lack of objective interests and affections. Now, realistically, as an 11th grade teacher, I don't understand how you are expected to read this and understand it. I'm just going to be honest with you. This is very dense text, and it's way above what I feel you should be able to read and decode at the 11th grade level. I would argue that probably most college students would struggle with this text. But I also want to say this. The point is not that you read this and understand every word, right? That's not the point of this literature, right? You want to have strategies that are going to let you pick out some basic ideas to talk about and talk about those ideas. So I want to stop right here and just say, be encouraged. Keep going. Because even though this text is boring and it's tough, and Bertrand Russell is clearly very intelligent but not very clear, we need to make sure that we just have a basic enough knowledge to get by talking about it, and then we'll be good. Everything else is going to come from people in the classroom who are going to help us with their insights. So we're not in this alone, right? Except for during this test, which is the part that I don't agree about. Anyway, let me get off of my soapbox here and continue on. Where the two are not knit together by the force of objective interests and affections, the happy man is the man who does not suffer from either these failures of unity. This is something I'm actually understanding here. The happy man is the man who does not suffer from either of these failures of unity, whose personality is neither divided against itself nor pitted against the world, right? Such a man feels himself a citizen of the universe, enjoying freely the spectacle that it not really separate from those who will come after him. It is in such profound instinctive union with the stream of life that the greatest joy is to be found. Now, Bertrand Russell basically says, right, that we are the world, right? If I quote that Michael Jackson song. So he basically says, we are the world. And he's talking about connectivity. He's talking about being connected to one another and not actually depriving ourselves of human contact, but being part of the world and taking part in it and being an active participant. So Bertrand Russell's argument is a little bit more complicated because he does say that you should regulate yourself and, prevent yourself from subscribing to ideas that are too ideal, like being a savior. But on the other hand, you also want to connect with society and not be off on your own, right? Now, what I'm going to do here is go ahead and wrap up this video because this is the end of the first text. The next one we're going to get into planning. And I really encourage you, if you've watched up to this point, do not skip the planning video. The planning video is going to be one of the most important. And I will see you on that video in just a matter of moments.